Maria Santos had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent Saturday mornings at the mall or watching television, she could be found at her grandfather's ranch, learning to handle firearms with the same precision he had learned during his military service. Her grandfather, Roberto, was a decorated Vietnam veteran who believed that every person should know how to protect themselves and their family. The old man had started teaching Maria when she was just 12 years old, beginning with basic safety rules that he repeated until they became second nature. Never point a gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. Always treat every firearm as if it's loaded. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Know your target and what's beyond it. These rules became as natural to Maria as breathing. By the time she turned 18, Maria could outshoot most of the local police officers and many of the weekend warriors who frequented the shooting ranges around town. Her accuracy was remarkable, but more importantly, she had developed an understanding of ballistics and firearms that impressed even the most experienced shooters. She could adjust for wind, distance, and lighting conditions with an intuitive sense that seemed almost supernatural. Despite her skills, Maria faced constant skepticism from the male-dominated shooting community. When she would arrive at competitions or practice sessions, the comments would begin immediately. Some men would make jokes about pretty girls playing with dangerous toys. Others would assume she was there to watch her boyfriend or father compete. The dismissive attitudes and condescending remarks had become so routine that Maria barely noticed them anymore. Her high school years had been particularly challenging. While she excelled academically and maintained a 4.0 grade point average, she struggled to fit in with her peers. The other students thought her hobby was strange and somewhat frightening. Teachers would sometimes express concern about her interest in firearms, despite the fact that she approached the subject with more discipline and respect than most adults they knew. Maria's parents had initially been hesitant about their daughter's passion for shooting sports. Her mother, Elena, worried about the social implications and the potential dangers. Her father, Carlos, was proud of his daughter's abilities, but concerned about the reactions of their conservative community. However, they had learned to support Maria's interests when they saw how seriously she took the responsibility and how much joy the sport brought to her life. The local shooting community was small and tightly knit. Most of the regular participants had known each other for years, and newcomers were often viewed with suspicion until they proved themselves. Maria had been attending events for several years, but she was still treated as an outsider by many of the older, more established shooters. They would acknowledge her presence politely, but rarely included her in their conversations or treated her as an equal competitor. The regional championship that would change everything was held at the prestigious Lone Star Shooting Complex, a state-of-the-art facility that hosted competitions throughout the Southwest. Maria had been preparing for this event for months, spending countless hours practicing different shooting positions and scenarios. She had saved money from her part-time job at a local diner to afford the entry fees and ammunition costs. The competition format was demanding, consisting of multiple stages that tested different aspects of marksmanship. Competitors would face precision shooting at various distances, rapid-fire sequences, and challenging positions that required both physical stamina and mental focus. The stakes were high, with the winners earning recognition throughout the regional shooting community and the opportunity to advance to national-level competitions. As Maria arrived at the shooting complex on the morning of the competition, she could feel the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that always accompanied important matches. She had spent the previous evening checking and rechecking her equipment, ensuring that her rifle was properly zeroed and that she had packed everything she would need for the day ahead. The other competitors were already gathering near the registration tables, and Maria could see many familiar faces from previous events. There were the usual suspects: retired military personnel, law enforcement officers, and serious hobbyists who had been competing for decades. She also noticed several newcomers, including a few other women, which was somewhat unusual for this level of competition. The registration process was smooth, and Maria received her competitor number and schedule for the day. She would be assigned to Squad Charlie, which would begin shooting at the 200-yard precision stage. As she reviewed the course of fire descriptions, she felt confident about her preparation. She had practiced extensively at these distances and was comfortable with the equipment requirements. During the safety briefing, the head range officer outlined the rules and procedures that would govern the competition. The emphasis on safety was paramount, and any violations would result in immediate disqualification. Maria appreciated this strict approach, as she had seen too many accidents caused by careless handling of firearms. The range officer also explained the scoring system and the procedures for challenging scores if competitors believed there had been an error. As the squads began rotating through the different stages, Maria found herself grouped with several experienced competitors who had been shooting competitively for many years. The conversation was polite but somewhat distant, with the men discussing their equipment choices and previous competition results while largely ignoring Maria's presence. The first stage went well for Maria, and she posted a respectable score that put her in the middle of the pack after the initial round. However, she could sense that some of the other competitors were not taking her seriously as a threat. She overheard comments suggesting that she had gotten lucky or that the easier stages were yet to come. As the day progressed, Maria began to find her rhythm, and her scores improved steadily. She was particularly strong in the precision shooting events, where her careful attention to fundamentals and her ability to read wind conditions gave her an advantage over some of the more experienced but less technically proficient shooters. The competition was being closely watched by several range officers who were responsible for ensuring fair play and safety. One of these officials was James Mitchell, a retired Marine colonel who had been involved in competitive shooting for over 30 years. Mitchell had a reputation for being strict but fair, and he was known for his ability to spot talent and potential in young shooters. As Mitchell observed the various competitors throughout the day, he began to notice something unusual about Maria's shooting style and her results. While her scores were solid and consistent, there was something about her approach that caught his experienced eye. She seemed to be holding back slightly, not pushing herself to the absolute limit of her abilities. The atmosphere at the range was typical for a high-level competition, with intense focus punctuated by moments of camaraderie between stages. Competitors would analyze their performance, make equipment adjustments, and discuss strategy with their teammates or coaches. Maria, shooting as an individual competitor without a formal support team, spent these breaks quietly reviewing her notes and preparing mentally for the next stage. As the competition moved into the afternoon, the pressure began to mount for all the participants. The accumulated scores were posted regularly, and it became clear that the race for the top positions would be extremely close. Several seasoned competitors were clustered at the top of the leaderboard, separated by just a few points. Maria found herself in a position she had never experienced before in a major competition. Her consistent performance throughout the day had moved her into serious contention for one of the top finishing positions. This was both exciting and nerve-wracking, as she had never been under this level of scrutiny and pressure in a competitive setting. The other competitors were beginning to take notice of her presence on the leaderboard, and the atmosphere around her was changing subtly. Some of the dismissive attitudes from earlier in the day were being replaced by curiosity and a grudging respect for her consistent performance. However, not everyone was pleased with Maria's success. A few of the more traditional competitors were making increasingly pointed comments about the changing nature of the sport and the appropriateness of certain participants. These comments were not directed at Maria specifically, but their intent was clear enough that she could feel the undercurrent of resentment. The penultimate stage of the competition was a challenging rapid-fire event that required competitors to engage multiple targets in a specified sequence within strict time limits. This type of shooting favored competitors with extensive tactical training and experience, and Maria knew that this could be where her inexperience would show. As she prepared for this stage, Maria could feel the eyes of the other competitors and spectators focused on her. The pressure was unlike anything she had experienced before, and she could feel her heart rate increasing as she approached the firing line. This was the moment that would determine whether her strong performance earlier in the day had been a fluke or a genuine demonstration of her abilities. The stage began with competitors taking their positions behind the firing line, weapons loaded and ready. The range commands echoed across the facility as each shooter in turn was called to demonstrate their skills under the watchful eyes of the range officers and their fellow competitors. The tension was palpable as each participant tried to balance speed with accuracy while managing the stress of competition. When Maria's turn came, she approached the line with outward calm, though internally she was fighting to control her breathing and heart rate. She had practiced this type of shooting extensively, but never under these conditions and with so much at stake. As she waited for the command to begin, she could hear whispered conversations from the other competitors, some encouraging and others less so. The rapid-fire stage proved to be exactly as challenging as Maria had anticipated. When the buzzer sounded, she moved through the course of fire with mechanical precision, engaging each target in the prescribed sequence. Her training with her grandfather had emphasized smooth, consistent movements over flashy speed, and this approach served her well under pressure. As she completed the stage, Maria felt reasonably confident about her performance, though she knew that several small mistakes had cost her valuable points. The other competitors in her squad had performed well, and she could see that the competition for the top positions would continue to be extremely tight. The scores from the rapid-fire stage confirmed Maria's assessment. While she had maintained her position in the upper tier of competitors, she had not gained any ground on the leaders. More importantly, she could see that several of the more experienced shooters were beginning to separate themselves from the field as the competition moved into its most challenging phases. During the break before the final stage, Maria found a quiet corner of the range where she could compose herself and prepare mentally for what would be the most important shooting of her competitive career to date. She reviewed her notes from previous practice sessions and visualized herself executing perfect shots under pressure. The final stage of the competition was announced as a long-range precision event that would test the absolute limits of the competitors' abilities. Targets would be placed at 400 yards, and shooters would have a limited number of shots to achieve the highest possible score. Wind conditions were variable, and the late afternoon lighting would add an additional challenge to an already difficult task. As the competitors gathered for the briefing on the final stage, Maria could sense the anticipation and nervousness in the group. This was the stage that would determine the final standings, and everyone knew that a single exceptional performance could vault a shooter from the middle of the pack into contention for the championship. The range officer explained the specific procedures for the long-range stage, emphasizing the importance of safety and the strict time limits that would be enforced. Competitors would shoot individually, with each shooter having 15 minutes to complete their string of shots. Spotting scopes would be available, but competitors would be responsible for making their own wind calls and elevation adjustments. Maria drew a shooting position in the middle of the rotation, which gave her the advantage of being able to observe several other competitors before her turn. She watched carefully as the first shooters took their positions and began engaging the distant targets. The wind was proving to be more challenging than expected, and several experienced competitors were struggling to maintain consistency. The scoring system for the final stage was unforgiving. Each shot was worth a maximum of 10 points, but only perfect shots would receive full value. Shots in the outer rings of the target would receive progressively lower scores, and complete misses would result in 0 points. With only 10 shots allowed, there was no margin for error. As Maria's turn approached, she could feel the familiar pre-competition butterflies beginning to settle into a focused calm that she had learned to cultivate through years of practice. She had developed a pre-shot routine that helped her manage stress and maintain consistency, and she began going through these familiar steps as she prepared her equipment. Her rifle was a precision instrument that she had learned to know intimately through countless hours of practice. Every adjustment, every characteristic, every subtle variation in its behavior was familiar to her. She had hand-loaded her ammunition to exact specifications, testing different combinations until she found the load that produced the most consistent accuracy in her particular rifle. When her name was called, Maria approached the firing line with steady confidence. She set up her shooting position with the methodical care that her grandfather had drilled into her, ensuring that her rifle was properly supported and that her body position would allow for consistent shot placement. She adjusted the scope for the distance and began reading the wind conditions. The first shot was always the most important in long-range shooting. It would tell her whether her initial adjustments were correct and give her valuable information about the conditions she would face for the remainder of the string. Maria settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and carefully squeezed the trigger. The shot felt good as it left the rifle, but At 400 yards, it would be several seconds before she could see the result through her spotting scope. When the impact became visible, Maria could see that her first shot had struck very close to the center of the target, but slightly to the left. This told her that she needed to make a minor adjustment for the wind conditions. The second shot incorporated her correction, and this time the bullet struck closer to the center of the target. Maria began to settle into the rhythm that she had practiced so many times, making small adjustments based on the feedback from each shot and the changing wind conditions. By her fifth shot, Maria had found her groove and was shooting with the kind of consistency that had impressed observers throughout her years of practice. Each shot was carefully planned and executed, with attention to every detail that could affect accuracy. Her scores were building steadily, and she began to realize that she was shooting better than she had ever shot in competition. The other competitors and spectators had begun to take notice of Maria's performance. Word was spreading through the crowd that the young woman who had been dismissed by many earlier in the day was putting together an exceptional string of shots. Range officers were paying closer attention, and several experienced shooters had gathered to watch her complete her string. As Maria prepared for her eighth shot, she was acutely aware that she was shooting better than she had any right to expect. Her scores on the first 7 shots were all in the high 9 or perfect 10 range, which was remarkable shooting under any circumstances and extraordinary for someone of her competitive experience. The 8th shot was another near-perfect impact, and Maria began to realize that she had a realistic chance of posting the highest score of the day on the final stage. This recognition brought with it a surge of adrenaline that she had to work to control. She had learned from her grandfather that pressure situations required even more attention to fundamentals, not less. The 9th shot continued her string of excellent impacts, and as Maria prepared for her final shot, she was aware that the entire range had become unusually quiet. Conversations had stopped, and all attention was focused on her performance. This was the kind of pressure that destroyed many shooters, but Maria found that her years of disciplined practice had prepared her well. Her final shot felt perfect as it left the rifle, and when the impact became visible through the spotting scope, Maria could see that she had achieved something exceptional. 10 shots, all clustered tightly in the center of a target 400 yards away, under challenging wind conditions and intense pressure. As the range officer called ceasefire to end Maria's string, there was a moment of absolute silence before scattered applause began from the spectators and waiting competitors. Maria remained in position for a moment, hardly believing what she had just accomplished. She had not only shot well, she had shot better than she had ever dreamed possible. The scoring of her target confirmed what everyone had witnessed. Maria had posted a nearly perfect score on the final stage, with 9 shots scoring perfect 10s and 1 shot scoring a high 9. It was a performance that would have been impressive for any shooter and was remarkable for someone in their first major competition. However, the drama of the day was far from over. While Maria had shot exceptionally well, several other competitors still remained to shoot, including some of the most experienced and decorated marksmen in the region. Her score had established a high benchmark, but it remained to be seen whether it would be sufficient to secure a top finishing position. As the remaining competitors took their turns on the final stage, Maria watched with intense interest. Some of the shooters who had been leading the competition throughout the day struggled with the challenging conditions and failed to match her performance. Others shot well, but could not quite achieve the level of consistency that Maria had demonstrated. The tension continued to build as each subsequent shooter completed their string. Maria found herself in the unfamiliar position of being the target that other shooters were trying to beat, rather than being the underdog trying to prove herself. It was a strange and somewhat uncomfortable feeling, but she was beginning to understand what it meant to compete at the highest levels. With only 3 shooters remaining, Maria's score was still holding up as the best of the day on the final stage. More importantly, when combined with her consistent performance throughout the earlier stages, she found herself in serious contention for one of the top 3 finishing positions in the overall competition. The penultimate shooter was a retired Army sniper with an impressive competitive record. As he took his position and began his string of shots, Maria could see that he was shooting with the kind of mechanical precision that comes from years of professional training. His first several shots were excellent, and it appeared that he might be the one to surpass her performance. However, As the pressure mounted, even this experienced shooter began to show signs of stress. A couple of shots strayed slightly from the center of the target, and while his overall performance was still very strong, it became clear that he would not be able to match Maria's exceptional string. The final shooter of the day was a legendary figure in regional competitive shooting. Tom Bradley had won this particular competition 3 times in the past decade, and was known for his ability to perform under pressure. As he prepared for his string, everyone on the range understood that this would likely determine the final outcome of the competition. Bradley's approach was methodical and confident. He had been shooting competitively longer than Maria had been alive, and his experience showed in every aspect of his preparation and execution. His first several shots were precisely placed, and it appeared that he was building toward the kind of performance that had made him a dominant figure in the sport. As Bradley continued through his string, Maria watched with a mixture of admiration and nervous anticipation. She could appreciate the skill and experience that he was demonstrating, even as she hoped that her own performance would prove to be sufficient to maintain her position in the standings. Bradley's shooting was as methodical and precise as his reputation suggested. Shot after shot found its mark with the kind of consistency that only comes from decades of dedicated practice and competition experience. Maria watched through her spotting scope as his impacts formed a tight cluster near the center of the target, each shot building upon the success of the previous one. By his 7th shot, it was clear that Bradley was shooting at an exceptional level, even by his own high standards. The crowd had grown larger as word of the close competition spread throughout the shooting complex, and spectators were positioning themselves to get the best view of what was shaping up to be a memorable finish to the day's events. As Bradley prepared for his 8th shot, Maria found herself experiencing emotions that were completely unfamiliar to her in a competitive setting. For the first time in her shooting career, she was watching someone else shoot while her own fate hung in the balance. It was a strange reversal of roles that gave her a new appreciation for the mental challenges that competitive shooting presented. Bradley's 8th shot was another excellent impact, maintaining the high standard he had established throughout his string. Maria could see through her spotting scope that his group of shots was extremely tight and well-centered, which meant that his final 2 shots would likely determine whether her remarkable performance would be enough to secure a top finishing position. The 9th shot continued Bradley's string of excellent impacts, and as he prepared for his final shot, the entire range seemed to hold its breath. This was a moment that epitomized the drama and excitement that made competitive shooting such a compelling sport for both participants and spectators. Bradley's final shot felt different to Maria as she watched through her scope. Something in his body language suggested that the pressure of the moment might have affected him slightly, and when the impact became visible, she could see that while it was still a very good shot, it was not quite up to the standard of his previous efforts. The scoring of Bradley's target confirmed what careful observers had suspected. While he had shot extremely well and had posted a score that would have won the competition on most days, his performance had fallen just short of matching Maria's exceptional string on the final stage. As the final calculations were completed and the overall standings were determined, Maria found herself in a position that she had never imagined possible when she woke up that morning. Her consistent performance throughout the day, combined with her outstanding shooting on the final stage, had earned her 2nd place overall in one of the most competitive shooting events in the region. The announcement of the final results created a buzz of excitement and surprise throughout the crowd. While Bradley had maintained his winning streak with a 1st-place finish, the story of the day was clearly Maria's unexpected rise from relative obscurity to a podium position in her first major competition. However, not everyone in the crowd was pleased with the outcome. Maria could overhear several conversations that expressed skepticism about her performance and suggestions that there might have been some kind of error in the scoring. The comments ranged from subtle questioning of the results to more direct accusations that something improper had occurred. The range officers were well aware of the controversy that Maria's performance had created among some of the competitors and spectators. They had been particularly careful to ensure that all scoring was accurate, and that proper procedures had been followed throughout the day. Nevertheless, they knew that extraordinary performances often generated questions and skepticism. James Mitchell, the head range officer, was particularly interested in Maria's shooting. As a former military marksman and longtime competition official, He had seen thousands of shooters over the years, and he recognized something special in her approach and technique. However, he was also aware that her success had created tension among some of the more traditional members of the shooting community. During the brief break before the award ceremony, Mitchell approached Maria to congratulate her on her performance and to discuss some of the technical aspects of her shooting. He was impressed not only by her accuracy, but also by her composure under pressure and her professional attitude throughout the day. As they talked, Mitchell learned more about Maria's background and training. He was particularly interested in her relationship with her grandfather and the disciplined approach to marksmanship that she had learned from him. It was clear to Mitchell that Maria's success was not the result of luck or accident, but rather the product of years of serious training and dedication. However, their conversation was interrupted by the approach of several competitors who wanted to examine Maria's target more closely. Led by a vocal critic named Dave Morrison, this group was openly skeptical of her performance and was demanding to see physical evidence of her claimed accuracy. Morrison was a longtime competitor who had finished well down in the standings despite his years of experience and expensive equipment. He was particularly frustrated by the fact that he had been outshot by someone he viewed as an amateur, and he was not shy about expressing his doubts about the legitimacy of her performance. The group gathered around Maria's target from the final stage, examining it carefully for any signs of irregularities. They measured the distances between impact points, looking for evidence that might support their suspicions that something improper had occurred. However, the target clearly showed exactly what the scores had indicated. 10 shots clustered tightly in the center of the target with remarkable consistency. As the examination continued, the group's skepticism began to take on a more accusatory tone. Morrison suggested that the target might have been tampered with or that Maria might have received unauthorized assistance during her string of shots. These accusations were particularly disturbing to Maria, who had worked so hard to achieve her success through legitimate means. Mitchell found himself in the difficult position of defending the integrity of the competition while also maintaining order among the participants. He had complete confidence in the accuracy of the scoring and the legitimacy of Maria's performance, but he also understood that extraordinary results sometimes required extraordinary verification. To address the concerns that had been raised, Mitchell made the decision to have Maria's target independently verified by 2 additional range officers who had not been involved in the original scoring. This was an unusual step, but he felt it was necessary to maintain the credibility of the competition and to protect Maria from unfounded accusations. The verification process was thorough and careful, with each impact point measured and scored according to the official rules. The 2 officers worked independently and then compared their results to ensure accuracy. After nearly 30 minutes of careful examination, they confirmed that the original scoring had been completely accurate. Despite this verification, Morrison and his supporters remained unconvinced. They continued to suggest that something improper must have occurred, though they could not specify exactly what they believed had happened. Their persistence was beginning to create an uncomfortable atmosphere that threatened to overshadow the achievements of all the competitors. It was at this point that Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. Rather than continuing to argue with the skeptics, he quietly walked to the rear of the shooting bay where Maria had completed her exceptional string of shots. What he found there would provide the definitive answer to all questions about her performance. The concrete wall behind the firing position showed clear evidence of Maria's shooting session. In competitive shooting, bullets that missed the target or passed through it continue downrange until they strike the backstop, or, in this case, the rear wall of the shooting bay. What Mitchell saw on that wall was a pattern that told a remarkable story. Instead of the scattered impacts that would typically result from 10 shots fired at a 400-yard target, the wall showed a tight cluster of bullet holes that corresponded exactly to Maria's target impacts. More importantly, the pattern on the wall revealed something that even Maria herself had not realized about her shooting that day. The cluster of impacts was not just tight, it was extraordinarily precise. The bullets had passed through the target with such accuracy that they had created an almost perfectly round pattern on the concrete wall. This was the kind of shooting that Mitchell had rarely seen in his decades of involvement in competitive marksmanship. But there was something even more remarkable about the pattern on the wall. Mixed in with the fresh impacts from Maria's shots were several older bullet holes from previous shooting sessions. The alignment of these holes with Maria's fresh impacts showed that she had been consistently hitting the exact same point of impact, shot after shot, with a level of precision that was truly extraordinary. Mitchell stood silently for several minutes, studying the evidence before him. As a former military marksman, he understood exactly what he was looking at. This was not the work of someone who had gotten lucky or who had somehow cheated. This was the signature of a truly exceptional shooter who had achieved something remarkable through skill, preparation, and natural ability. The pattern on the wall also explained another mystery that had been puzzling Mitchell throughout the day. Several of the range officers had reported hearing unusual sounds from Maria's shooting position during her string of shots. They had described a distinctive crack that seemed different from the normal sound of bullets impacting the backstop. Now Mitchell understood what they had been hearing. Maria's shots had been so precisely placed that her bullets were actually striking previous bullet impacts in the concrete wall. The unusual sound had been the result of bullets hitting the exact same spot repeatedly, creating a unique acoustic signature that the experienced range officers had noticed but not initially understood. As Mitchell continued to examine the evidence on the wall, he began to realize that Maria's achievement went far beyond simply shooting a high-scoring competition. She had demonstrated a level of precision that bordered on the miraculous, achieving consistency that would be remarkable under ideal practice conditions and was almost unbelievable under the pressure of competition. The implications of what he was seeing began to sink in as Mitchell considered the broader context of Maria's performance. This was not just a case of a talented young shooter having a good day. This was evidence of someone who possessed truly exceptional natural ability combined with outstanding training and preparation. Mitchell also understood that the evidence on the wall would provide the definitive answer to the questions and accusations that had been raised about Maria's performance. No amount of cheating or assistance could explain the pattern he was looking at. This could only be the result of legitimate, exceptional marksmanship. As he prepared to return to the group and share his discovery, Mitchell reflected on the significance of what he had witnessed. In his years of involvement in competitive shooting, he had seen many talented marksmen and women, but he had rarely encountered someone with Maria's combination of natural ability and disciplined technique. He also recognized that Maria's success represented something important for the sport of competitive shooting. Her achievement demonstrated that excellence could emerge from unexpected places and that the traditional assumptions about who could succeed at the highest levels might need to be reconsidered. The evidence on the wall would soon become the talk of the entire shooting community, but, for the moment, Mitchell was the only person who fully understood the magnitude of what Maria had accomplished. As he walked back toward the group of competitors and spectators, he knew that he was about to share information that would change how everyone viewed both Maria's performance and her potential as a competitive shooter. Mitchell's return to the group was met with expectant faces from both Maria's supporters and her critics. Morrison and his allies were still examining her target with skeptical expressions, while other competitors waited to see how the controversy would be resolved. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone understood that Mitchell's next words would be crucial. Instead of immediately addressing the group, Mitchell approached Maria directly. His expression was serious but not unkind, and those watching couldn't determine whether his findings supported or contradicted her claimed performance. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as he studied her face, perhaps trying to gauge whether she truly understood what she had accomplished. "Maria," Mitchell said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military and competitive experience. "I need you to come with me for a moment. There's something you need to see." His tone was neutral, giving no indication of whether this was good news or bad news for the young shooter who had surprised everyone with her exceptional performance. As they walked toward the rear of the shooting bay, Morrison called out, "Whatever you're doing back there, we want to see it too. This whole thing smells fishy, and we deserve to know what's really going on." Several other skeptical competitors nodded in agreement and began to follow Mitchell and Maria toward the back wall. Mitchell paused and turned to address the growing crowd. "Everyone is welcome to come and see what I've found. In fact, I think it's important that you all witness this yourselves. But I want everyone to understand that what you're about to see will settle this matter definitively, one way or another. The group gathered behind Mitchell as he led them to the concrete wall that served as the ultimate backstop for the shooting bay. The wall was pocked with thousands of bullet holes from years of competitive shooting, creating a honeycomb pattern of impacts at various heights and positions. To the casual observer, it appeared to be nothing more than the expected result of bullets that had missed their intended targets or passed through them. Mitchell positioned himself in front of a particular section of the wall and began to point out specific details that were not immediately obvious to the untrained eye. "What you're looking at here," he began, his voice taking on the tone of an instructor, "is the physical evidence of every shot that Maria fired during her string on the final stage." Morrison pushed forward to get a better look, his skepticism evident in every gesture. "I don't see anything special here," he said dismissively. "It just looks like a bunch of random bullet holes to me. How do you know which ones are from today?" Mitchell smiled slightly, the expression of someone who was about to reveal something remarkable. "That's exactly what I thought at first. But look more carefully at this area right here." He pointed to a cluster of impacts that appeared to be fresher than the surrounding holes, with concrete dust still visible around the edges. As the group examined the wall more closely, some of the more experienced shooters began to notice something unusual about the pattern. The fresh impacts weren't scattered randomly, as would be expected from shots at a 400-yard target. Instead, they formed an incredibly tight cluster that spoke to a level of precision that was almost beyond belief. "These 10 impacts," Mitchell continued, pointing to each hole in sequence, "represent Maria's 10 shots from today's final stage. But that's not the remarkable part. The remarkable part is what they tell us about the consistency of her shooting." He paused to let the significance of his words sink in before continuing. "You see, when a bullet passes cleanly through a target at 400 yards and continues to this back wall, it should create a pattern roughly corresponding to the group size on the target. But what we have here is something I've rarely seen in 30 years of competitive shooting." Mitchell's voice carried a note of genuine amazement that even the skeptics couldn't ignore. One of the other range officers, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, stepped forward to add his perspective. "I've been working these competitions for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen shooting this precise. This isn't luck, and it certainly isn't the result of any kind of cheating." Morrison remained unconvinced, though his protests were beginning to sound less confident. "I still don't see how you can prove that these particular holes came from her shots today. This wall has been shot at for years, and there are hundreds of holes here." Mitchell anticipated this objection and had prepared accordingly. From his pocket, he produced a small flashlight and began to illuminate the holes he had identified. Under the bright light, the difference between fresh impacts and older ones became unmistakable. The newer holes showed bright, clean concrete with sharp edges, while the older impacts had weathered surfaces and accumulated dirt. But there was something even more compelling about the evidence Mitchell was presenting. Several of Maria's impacts had struck existing bullet holes, creating enlarged openings that showed clear evidence of multiple strikes in precisely the same location. This was the source of the unusual sounds that several range officers had reported during her shooting session. "This is what we call shooting out a previous impact," Mitchell explained, indicating one of the enlarged holes. "It happens when a bullet strikes exactly the same spot as a previous shot, enlarging the existing hole. The fact that Maria did this multiple times during her string tells us something important about the precision of her shooting." As the group continued to examine the evidence, even the most skeptical competitors began to acknowledge that they were looking at something extraordinary. The pattern on the wall provided irrefutable proof that Maria's performance had been legitimate and that her level of precision was truly exceptional. Dr. Sarah Chun, a competitive shooter and university physics professor who had been quietly observing the discussion, stepped forward to offer her technical analysis. "From a ballistics perspective, what we're seeing here is remarkable. To achieve this level of consistency at 400 yards requires not just excellent marksmanship, but also perfectly consistent ammunition and environmental conditions." She continued her explanation, drawing on her scientific background to help the group understand the significance of what they were observing. The fact that multiple bullets struck essentially the same point means that Maria was able to control every variable that affects bullet flight. That includes her shooting position, her trigger control, her wind reading, and her equipment management. Morrison's protests were becoming weaker as the evidence mounted against his skepticism. Even if her shooting was good, there's no way a beginner should be able to outshoot experienced competitors like Tom Bradley. There has to be some other explanation. It was at this point that Bradley himself stepped forward to offer his perspective on the day's events. As the winner of the competition and one of the most respected shooters in the region, his opinion carried considerable weight with everyone present. "I've been competing at this level for over 20 years, Bradley said, his voice reflecting both humility and genuine respect for what he had witnessed. What Maria accomplished today was exceptional by any standard. She outshot me on the final stage, and she earned her second-place finish through legitimate skill and preparation." Bradley continued, addressing Morrison's concerns directly. "The suggestion that experience always trumps talent is simply not true in competitive shooting. I've seen young shooters with natural ability achieve remarkable results, and I've also seen experienced shooters struggle when they encounter someone with superior skills." The crowd that had gathered around the back wall was growing larger as word of the discovery spread throughout the shooting complex. Other competitors who had finished their events were coming to see the evidence that was settling the controversy about Maria's performance. Among the new arrivals was Elena Rodriguez, a former Olympic shooting team member who now worked as a coach and talent scout for promising young shooters. She had heard about Maria's performance and was curious to evaluate the technical aspects of her achievement. After examining the evidence on the wall and reviewing Maria's target, Rodriguez approached the young shooter with an expression of professional interest. "Maria, I'd like to talk with you about your training and your future plans in competitive shooting. What you've accomplished today suggests that you have the potential to compete at much higher levels." The conversation with Rodriguez opened Maria's eyes to possibilities she had never considered. The former Olympian explained the structure of competitive shooting at the national and international levels, describing training programs and competitions that could help Maria develop her skills further. "Talent like yours is rare," Rodriguez explained. "But talent alone isn't enough to succeed at the highest levels. You'll need access to better training facilities, more advanced equipment, and coaching from people who understand the technical aspects of precision shooting at the Olympic level." As the afternoon wore on, the controversy about Maria's performance gradually gave way to recognition and respect from the shooting community. Even Morrison eventually acknowledged that the evidence was compelling and that his initial skepticism had been unfounded. The awards ceremony that evening was particularly meaningful for Maria, who found herself standing on the podium alongside competitors she had long admired. The second-place trophy was more than just recognition of her shooting that day. It represented validation of years of dedicated practice and preparation. In his remarks during the ceremony, Mitchell took the opportunity to address the broader significance of Maria's achievement. "Today we witnessed something special," he told the assembled competitors and spectators. "We saw a young shooter demonstrate that excellence can emerge from unexpected places and that the future of our sport is bright when it includes people with Maria's dedication and natural ability." The impact of Maria's performance extended far beyond the immediate competition. Her success challenged assumptions about who could excel in competitive shooting and demonstrated that traditional barriers could be overcome through skill and determination. In the weeks following the competition, Maria found herself receiving invitations to participate in other events and offers of sponsorship from equipment manufacturers who recognized her potential. The shooting community that had initially been skeptical was now eager to support her development as a competitive marksman. Her grandfather Roberto was particularly proud of her achievement, seeing it as validation of the training methods and values he had tried to instill in her. "You showed them what we already knew," he told her. "That shooting is about more than just equipment and experience. It's about discipline, respect, and the willingness to put in the work necessary to achieve excellence." The story of Maria's remarkable performance spread throughout the regional shooting community and beyond, inspiring other young shooters who had felt excluded from or intimidated by competitive shooting. Her success demonstrated that the sport was open to anyone willing to dedicate themselves to mastering its challenges. Looking back on that transformative day, Maria understood that it had been about more than just winning a competition. It had been about proving to herself and others that she belonged among the best competitive shooters in the region. The evidence on the back wall had provided irrefutable proof of her abilities, but, more importantly, it had opened doors to a future she had never imagined possible. The whispered conversation between Mitchell and Maria at the back wall had changed everything. Not just for her immediate standing in the competition, but for her entire future in competitive shooting. As she packed her equipment that evening, Maria knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take her far beyond the small Texas town where she had learned to shoot. The concrete wall with its pattern of precisely placed bullet holes would remain as a permanent testament to what she had achieved that day. And, years later, when other young shooters visited the shooting complex, range officers would point to those impacts and tell the story of the day when they laughed at the girl who missed until they looked at the back wall and discovered the truth about exceptional marksmanship.